Welcome to our free learning university Next Generation. Today's journey begins in a place far from the flashing screens, glossy gadgets, and high-tech factories that we associate with Samsung. Imagine a small Korean town in the late 1930s, a nation struggling to recover, and a young entrepreneur named Lee Byung-chul, who had a dream simple, yet powerful, to build something lasting. Something that would lift his country out of poverty. No one could have imagined that this small business, founded in 1938, would one day become one of the world's largest technology empires. But Samsung's story isn't just about phones and TVs, it's about persistence, adaptation, and a vision that evolved with time. It all started with fish, noodles, and rice. Yes, Samsung's first business wasn't in electronics, it was a trading company. Lee Byung-chul began by selling dried fish, groceries, and noodles in Daegu, Korea. He called it Samsung Sangho, meaning 3 stars. The 3 stars symbolized greatness, power, and eternity. In those early years, Korea was still under Japanese rule, and opportunities were scarce. But Lee had something powerful, a strategic mind. He built networks with suppliers, maintained relationships with merchants, and ensured that his goods reached markets on time even during wartime shortages. After Korea's liberation in 1945, Samsung's opportunities began to grow. The nation was rebuilding, and Lee saw something others didn't: a country ready to industrialize. He began expanding into sugar refining, textiles, and insurance. Each business he touched became a building block towards something bigger. But the real turning point came in the 1960s, when South Korea's government started supporting industrialization. Lee realized that the future wasn't just in trade, it was in technology. In 1969, Samsung made its boldest move yet. Partnering with Sunyu, it launched Samsung Electronics, a small division with one big dream: to make Korea a global player in technology. Their first products were humble black and white TVs, yet they marked the beginning of a transformation that would redefine global innovation. At that time, few believed that a Korean company could compete with Japanese giants like Sony or Panasonic. But Samsung had something unique: a relentless learning spirit. Engineers worked tirelessly, often dismantling imported electronics to learn how they worked. This wasn't just about copying, it was about understanding. By the early 1970s, Samsung's ambition expanded beyond TVs. It entered the semiconductor industry, a field dominated by American and Japanese firms. It was a daring, almost reckless move, but Lee Byung-chul wasn't afraid of failure. He believed in taking big bets. He once said, "If you want to do something big, do it differently." That mindset became the DNA of Samsung. Throughout the 1970s, Samsung began manufacturing microwave ovens, refrigerators, and washing machines, products that made life easier for millions of families. Yet, behind the scenes, its engineers were preparing for something much greater: the digital revolution. Lee envisioned a Korea where innovation wasn't imported, it was created at home. So, he invested in education and research. Samsung built training centers and research labs to nurture Korean engineers. This focus on skill building would later give Samsung an edge no foreign company could easily match. But success didn't come overnight. The global electronics market was brutally competitive. Samsung's early products often lagged in quality. International buyers laughed at Korean brands, calling them cheap imitations. Still, Lee and his team refused to give up. They believed that consistency would earn respect. Every product that failed taught them something new. And by the late 1970s, Samsung started exporting TVs and home appliances worldwide. Slowly but surely, the world began to notice. As the 1980s approached, Lee Byung-chul's dream of making Samsung a global powerhouse seemed closer than ever. Yet, he knew that to truly compete on the world stage, Samsung had to focus on something deeper than products. It had to create a culture of innovation and discipline. Little did he know, his vision would soon face its biggest test yet: a new generation of leadership, a global market ready for change, and a company about to transform from an imitator into an innovator. The foundation had been laid. From fish to factories, from noodles to microchips, Samsung had come a long way. But the journey toward becoming the giant of technology had only just begun. By the dawn of the 1980s, Samsung stood at a crossroads. The company had grown far beyond its humble trading roots. It was now a vast industrial conglomerate with dozens of subsidiaries across Korea. But its ambitions were stretching far beyond national borders. The world was entering a digital revolution, and Lee Byung-chul, Samsung's founder, understood one vital truth. Whoever controlled technology would control the future. To compete globally, Samsung needed to evolve. The 1980s marked the beginning of its transformation into a global tech power. This era saw Samsung making some of its most important and risky decisions in history. One of the company's most daring moves came in 1983, when it entered the semiconductor business. At that time, the idea of a Korean company producing microchips seemed almost laughable to Western competitors. Japan, the US, and a few European firms dominated the industry. Yet, Lee believed semiconductors were the brains of the future economy. He once told his executives, "We must build the brains before we can build the machines." So, despite skepticism, Samsung poured billions into research and development. Engineers traveled abroad to study chip manufacturing, often returning with nothing more than notebooks full of sketches and ideas. The learning curve was brutal. Machines malfunctioned, yields were low, and profits seemed distant. But Lee was patient. He had always seen business as a long game. In 1984, Samsung produced its first 6K DRAM chip. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And more importantly, it proved that a Korean company could play in the big leagues. This moment marked the birth of Samsung's technological identity. No longer just a manufacturer, it was now a creator of cutting-edge components. But even as Samsung's tech side grew, the company was also facing growing pains. Its rapid expansion meant layers of bureaucracy, communication problems, and occasional product quality issues. Internally, Lee pushed his teams to be faster, smarter, and more disciplined. He believed in what he called the Samsung spirit, an unrelenting pursuit of excellence, guided by humility and hard work. By the mid-1980s, Samsung's electronics division began exporting color televisions, VCRs, and refrigerators across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. Slowly, Samsung's name began to carry weight, still not on par with Sony or Panasonic, but no longer ignored. Then, in 1987, tragedy struck. Lee Byung-chul, the visionary founder of Samsung, passed away. His death marked the end of an era, but not the end of his vision. His son, Lee Kun-hee, stepped in as chairman. Few could have predicted that under his leadership, Samsung would transform from a regional manufacturer into a world-dominating technology empire. Lee Kun-hee was different from his father. While Lee Byung-chul had been a builder and strategist, Kun-hee was a reformer, perfectionist obsessed with quality and innovation. He looked at Samsung's growing but scattered empire and saw inefficiency. He believed the company had the resources but lacked focus. In 1993, during a meeting in Frankfurt, Germany, he delivered a speech that became legendary. He told his executives, "Change everything except your wife and children." This became known as the Frankfurt Declaration, and it changed Samsung forever. Under Lee Kun-hee's command, Samsung began a massive internal transformation. The goal, quality over quantity. For years, Samsung had produced in bulk millions of affordable TVs, radios, and appliances, but now, the chairman demanded excellence. He shut down product lines that didn't meet his standards, even destroying thousands of defective phones and electronics in front of his employees to make a point. It was a symbolic rebirth. The new philosophy was clear: be the best, not the biggest. This cultural shift ignited Samsung's rise through the 1990s. Research centers were expanded in Korea, Japan, and the United States. The company invested heavily in design and innovation, bringing in global talent and sending Korean engineers abroad for education and training. Samsung began filing patents, improving its image, and competing head-on with global leaders. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the world started noticing. Samsung's semiconductor division became one of the most advanced in the world. In 1992, Samsung overtook its Japanese rivals to become the world's largest producer of memory chips, a milestone that stunned the tech industry. This victory was more than business, it was symbolic. For decades, Japan had dominated the Asian tech scene. Now, a South Korean company had surpassed them, signaling a new era for Korean innovation. But Lee Kun-hee wasn't done. He had a grander vision. Samsung wouldn't just make components. It would make products that define lifestyles, televisions, mobile phones, and eventually, digital devices that connected the world. Still, the path ahead was full of challenges. Competitors were fierce, technology was evolving rapidly, and the global market was unpredictable. Yet, Samsung's new foundation, discipline, innovation, and a global mindset gave it the strength to adapt. By the end of the 1990s, Samsung had already planted seeds that would bloom into its future dominance. But it was about to face one of the greatest tests in modern business history, the Asian financial crisis, a storm that would either destroy Samsung or force it to evolve once more. By the mid-1990s, Samsung had become a recognized global player, but it was still not the household name we know today. Its televisions and chips were selling, yes, but its reputation lagged behind industry giants like Sony, Panasonic, and Motorola. The company's challenge was clear. It could build anything, but could it build a brand that people loved? That question became more urgent when, in 1997, disaster struck. The Asian financial crisis. Across South Korea, once booming corporations were collapsing overnight. The nation's currency lost half its value, unemployment skyrocketed, and major conglomerates filed for bankruptcy. Even Samsung, with its vast resources, wasn't immune. The crisis hit Samsung like a tidal wave. The company was burdened with massive debts from its rapid expansion, and global demand for electronics plummeted. For a moment, it seemed like everything Lee Kun-hee had built could crumble. Inside Samsung's headquarters in Suwon, there was fear, but also determination. Lee Kun-hee saw the crisis not as a death sentence, but as a moment of transformation. While many companies slashed costs and retreated, he doubled down on innovation and restructuring. He believed that survival would not come from shrinking, but from reinventing. He gathered his top executives and declared, "This is not the end. This is our chance to prove that Samsung is not just a Korean company, it's a global leader." Under his direction, Samsung sold off non-essential divisions, construction, paper, chemicals to focus purely on electronics, telecommunications, and semiconductors. Thousands of employees were laid off, factories were consolidated, and efficiency became the new religion inside the company. But the most dramatic change was Samsung's obsession with design and quality. Lee Kun-hee launched a company-wide initiative called the Digital Vision, a 10-year plan to transform Samsung into a premium global brand by the early 2000s. The shift wasn't easy. Inside Korea, Samsung's workers were used to producing fast and cheap. Now, they were being told to slow down, refine, and perfect. Lee Kun-hee introduced programs where managers and engineers traveled to Europe and the US to study the world's leading luxury brands. They learned about marketing, branding, and product aesthetics, concepts rarely discussed in Korean corporate culture at that time. The company also opened new design centers in San Francisco, London, and Tokyo, where multicultural teams would shape products for global audiences. Samsung was no longer thinking like a Korean company, it was thinking like a world brand. By 1999, the results were starting to show. Samsung launched its first flat-screen digital TVs, which stunned the market with their slim designs and vibrant clarity. It was a signal that Samsung could not only catch up, but lead in innovation. The crisis had done something extraordinary. It had forced Samsung to evolve from an ambitious regional manufacturer into a focused innovation powerhouse. But one of the most important revolutions was still to come: mobile phones. At the time, Motorola, Nokia, and Ericsson ruled the global mobile industry. Samsung was a small player, often dismissed as an imitator, yet Lee Kun-hee believed the future of technology would live in people's hands, not their homes. In the late 1990s, Samsung engineers began developing their first generation of digital mobile phones. They faced countless challenges: battery issues, poor reception, clunky design, but the company's new design-first philosophy meant every failure was treated as a lesson. In 1999, Samsung released the SGH600, a sleek phone that combined minimalist design with reliable performance. It didn't outsell Nokia's models, but it proved that Samsung could build competitive mobile devices. The following year, Samsung introduced color screen phones, beating many Western competitors to market. The new millennium dawned, and with it came Samsung's rebirth. The 2000s would see the company take everything it had learned from decades of struggle: resilience, innovation, reinvention, and use it to redefine entire industries. It would no longer chase others. It would lead. The company's slogan at the time captured its spirit perfectly: imagine the possibilities. From this point forward, Samsung was ready to turn imagination into reality. As global markets stabilized after the financial crisis, Samsung began expanding aggressively into Europe and North America. The brand's new high-end image was supported by sleek advertisements, modern showrooms, and sponsorships of international events. For the first time, people in the West began to associate the name Samsung not with cheap electronics, but with innovation and style. By 2002, Samsung overtook Sony in global brand rankings, a symbolic victory that marked the company's coming of age. But behind that success, Lee Kun-hee remained restless. He knew technology was moving fast and complacency could kill even the strongest brand. In meetings, he constantly repeated, "The moment you think you are the best is the moment you start falling behind." And so, Samsung pushed forward, investing billions into R&D, experimenting with LCD displays, and preparing for what would soon become its defining decade: the era of smartphones and digital dominance. The storm of the Asian crisis had passed, but Samsung's journey into the 21st century was just beginning. As the new millennium began, Samsung stood taller than ever before. The chaos of the 1997 financial crisis had forged a new company, leaner, smarter, and more daring. But the world was changing fast. The early 2000s were a golden age of digital transformation. DVDs were replacing VHS tapes. Flat-screen TVs were becoming mainstream, and mobile phones were beginning to define human connection. Samsung's leadership saw an opportunity. The future wasn't just electronics, it was mobility. People wanted power, communication, and entertainment in the palm of their hands. The company's mission became clear: to make technology personal. Under the direction of Chairman Lee Kun-hee, Samsung began an aggressive push into mobile technology. It poured billions into research, design, and chip manufacturing to build phones that could rival the best in the world. While Nokia and Motorola dominated with reliable, practical devices, Samsung wanted to blend power with beauty, engineering excellence with visual appeal. By 2002, Samsung had unveiled the SGHT100, one of the first phones with a color display, stunning users with its clarity and style. This single product marked a turning point. Samsung was no longer just catching up, it was leading trends. Consumers began to associate Samsung with innovation and elegance. At the same time, the company's display and semiconductor divisions were booming. Samsung became the world's largest producer of memory chips and LCD screens, supplying even its rivals, including Apple, Dell, and Sony. The irony was striking. Competitors depended on Samsung's components to build their own competing products. This dual strategy, building for itself while supplying the world, gave Samsung an incredible advantage. It had both scale and intelligence. The company could innovate faster because it controlled the most critical parts of the tech supply chain. By 2005, Samsung's name was everywhere: on TVs, home appliances, and phones. Its digital, everyone's invited marketing campaign reflected its mission to democratize technology, to make it accessible and aspirational. But despite its success, one area remained unconquered: the smartphone revolution. Then came 2007, a year that would change the entire tech landscape forever. Apple launched the iPhone, and the world was stunned. A sleek glass screen, no physical keyboard, multi-touch controls that redefined what a phone could be. For Samsung, it was both a threat and an awakening. Inside Samsung's headquarters, the reaction was immediate. Executives studied Apple's design obsessively. They knew the smartphone era had begun, and falling behind wasn't an option. Within months, Samsung reorganized its mobile division, directing massive resources into developing its own smartphone platform. The result was the Samsung Galaxy Project, a bold initiative to create a family of smartphones that could compete head-to-head with the iPhone while running Google's Android OS. The first Samsung Galaxy S, launched in 2010, marked the beginning of a new era. It was sleek, powerful, and globally successful. Reviewers called it the first real iPhone competitor. Consumers loved it. Samsung had officially entered the smartphone war, and it wasn't planning to lose. Behind the scenes, Samsung's engineers and designers worked tirelessly. The company's R&D spending was astronomical, billions of dollars each year. Every new model was an evolution in speed, camera quality, and design. Samsung didn't just follow trends, it created them. Curved screens, AMOLED displays, waterproof bodies — these innovations became industry standards. By 2012, Samsung overtook Apple as the world's largest smartphone maker, selling over 215 million smartphones that year alone. The once small trading company that began selling dried fish in 1938 had now become a global symbol of technology and progress. But Samsung's rise wasn't without controversy. In 2011, Apple filed a massive lawsuit against Samsung, accusing it of copying the iPhone's design. The legal battle would last for years and span multiple countries. Headlines called it the smartphone war of the century. Yet, even amid lawsuits and global scrutiny, Samsung continued to dominate. Consumers didn't care about legal fights, they cared about innovation. Each new Galaxy device pushed boundaries further. Samsung became known not just for competing with Apple, but for challenging it. The company's advertisements even leaned into the rivalry, with slogans like "the next big thing is already here." These bold campaigns painted Samsung as the underdog rebel challenging the industry giant, a narrative that resonated deeply with young audiences. Meanwhile, Samsung continued investing heavily in the future of displays. In 2013, it launched the world's first curved OLED TV, and later the Edge smartphone series, showcasing its engineering dominance. The world began to view Samsung as more than a tech company. It was a brand that symbolized ambition, innovation, and global excellence. Internally, the company's culture evolved again. Lee Kun-hee's philosophy of change everything was now deeply rooted in Samsung's DNA. His successor and son, Lee Jae-yong (J.Y. Lee), began preparing to take the reins, ensuring continuity of vision. By the mid-2010s, Samsung was no longer chasing anyone, it was defining the pace of technology itself. From chipsets to displays, from TVs to smartphones, it had become the heartbeat of the digital world. But as with every empire, growth brought new challenges. Competition intensified, innovation became costlier, and public expectations reached unimaginable heights. Samsung now had to prove that it could not just rise but stay on top. The next chapter in Samsung's story would test everything it had built: its leadership, its integrity, and its global reputation. By the mid-2010s, Samsung was standing at the summit of the global tech world. The Galaxy series had turned into a cultural icon synonymous with performance, design, and innovation. From Seoul to San Francisco, Samsung's presence was felt in every pocket, living room, and boardroom. But what goes up must face the winds of challenge. In 2016, Samsung faced one of the darkest moments in its history: the Galaxy Note 7 crisis. The device, hyped as a game-changer, started catching fire due to battery defects. News footage showed smoking phones, grounded flights, and recalls that cost the company billions. It was a nightmare for a brand that had built its empire on trust and quality. Internally, Samsung went into emergency mode. Entire production lines were halted, and every department worked round the clock to identify the issue. The problem turned out to be not one, but to separate battery design flaws, a devastating blow for a company known for precision engineering. The global media went wild. Memes flooded the internet. Analysts predicted Samsung's downfall, claiming the company's reputation was beyond repair. For the first time in decades, Samsung appeared vulnerable. But instead of denying the issue, Samsung did something remarkable. It owned the mistake. The company launched one of the largest product recalls in history, pulling over 2.5 million devices off shelves. Then, it publicly detailed its findings through transparent press conferences, outlining new 8-point battery safety measures that would set an industry benchmark. This honesty restored faith. Customers began to respect Samsung not just for its products, but for its accountability. The Note 7 disaster, while painful, became a lesson that strengthened Samsung's internal systems forever. Only a year later, in 2017, Samsung returned stronger than ever with the Galaxy S8, a sleek, bezel-less smartphone that redefined modern design. The phone's infinity display became iconic, and critics hailed it as a stunning comeback. The company's resilience had turned tragedy into triumph. Behind this success stood thousands of engineers, designers, and executives who had rebuilt the company's confidence brick by brick. Samsung's comeback wasn't just about hardware, it was about redemption. At the same time, Samsung was diversifying beyond smartphones. It poured massive investments into artificial intelligence, Internet of Things (IoT), 5G technology, and semiconductors. The world's data was exploding, and Samsung wanted to be the one building the chips that powered it all. By 2018, Samsung had become the world's largest semiconductor company, surpassing Intel. It was supplying the brains behind everything from Apple's iPhones to Tesla's cars. The irony of its competitors relying on Samsung's chips made the brand's dominance even more profound. But success brought new scrutiny. The company found itself entangled in a political scandal involving Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong, who was accused of bribery linked to South Korea's former president. The story shook the nation. J.Y. Lee was briefly jailed, and headlines speculated about a leadership crisis. Yet, even amid chaos, Samsung's operations didn't stop. The company's global machine kept running smoothly, powered by a disciplined structure and decentralized leadership. Samsung's focus on long-term innovation meant that even political storms couldn't derail its trajectory. The company doubled down on its R&D, establishing futuristic research centers in Silicon Valley, Bangalore, and Seoul. These labs were tasked with exploring the next wave of human technology interaction, from foldable displays to self-learning chips. Then came 2019, the year Samsung shocked the world, again with the Galaxy Fold. It wasn't perfect. Early models faced durability issues, but it represented something deeper. Samsung's fearless pursuit of innovation. While others hesitated to take big risks, Samsung led the way into the foldable phone revolution. By now, Samsung had become more than a tech brand. It was a symbol of South Korea's national pride. Its towering headquarters in Suwon and gleaming skyscrapers in Seoul represented the power of Korean innovation on the global stage. From manufacturing dried fish to becoming a trillion-dollar corporation, Samsung's story mirrored South Korea's transformation from war-torn poverty to modern prosperity. It was no longer just a company, it was a cultural force. Samsung's rise also transformed global business philosophy. Where Silicon Valley celebrated individualism and disruption, Samsung embodied collective discipline and perseverance. It thrived on teamwork, long-term vision, and constant reinvention. By 2020, Samsung had solidified its dominance in multiple markets. Number 1 in smartphones globally, alongside Apple in premium and Xiaomi in mid-range. Number 2 in TV and display panels. Number 2 in memory and storage chips. A growing leader in home automation, AI, and 5 infrastructure. The COVID-19 pandemic hit the world hard, but Samsung's integrated supply chain allowed it to adapt quickly. As people stayed home, demand for electronics skyrocketed: TVs, tablets, phones, chips. Samsung's factories ran tirelessly, fulfilling orders when other giants stumbled. The result: record-breaking profits. Even in global crisis, Samsung proved its industrial resilience. But behind every victory was a haunting question: what's next? The tech landscape was shifting again. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and sustainable tech were becoming the next battlegrounds. Samsung's challenge was no longer growth, it was evolution. Chairman Lee Kun-hee, the visionary who had rebuilt Samsung after the 1990s crisis, passed away in 2020, leaving behind a powerful legacy. His philosophy, change everything except your wife and children, continued to guide the company. His son, Lee Jae-yong, officially took the helm, vowing to lead Samsung into a new digital era. The future Samsung envisioned was ambitious: AI-driven smart homes, connected vehicles, and devices that seamlessly interact across every aspect of human life. The company's mission evolved from leading technology to shaping the human experience through innovation, even as global competition from China and Silicon Valley grew fiercer. Samsung's foundation, discipline, innovation, and adaptability remained unshakable. By the early 2020s, Samsung wasn't just selling products, it was defining lifestyles. From foldable phones to Ultra HD TVs and smart refrigerators that could order groceries, Samsung's ecosystem had become a daily part of life for billions. The company that once sold fish now built futures. And through every crisis, every reinvention, and every triumph, one truth remained: Samsung never stopped evolving. As the 2020s unfolded, Samsung stood on the edge of another transformation, one that would define the next generation of global innovation. Having conquered the worlds of consumer electronics, semiconductors, and communications, the Korean giant set its sights on reshaping the future of life itself. The vision was no longer limited to selling devices. It was about creating an interconnected ecosystem, or world where your phone, your fridge, your car, and even your watch understood you. Samsung called this its connected future. Every product was designed to communicate seamlessly, powered by artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things. At the heart of this transformation was Samsung SmartThings, a unified platform connecting millions of devices worldwide. Whether adjusting the lighting, controlling home security, or tracking energy consumption, SmartThings turned everyday living into a personalized experience. Samsung wasn't just building technology, it was crafting convenience. But behind these sleek innovations was a renewed corporate philosophy. The company had learned that true leadership wasn't about speed, it was about sustainability. As climate change and environmental concerns rose to the forefront, Samsung committed to becoming carbon neutral by 2050. The company began investing heavily in renewable energy, sustainable packaging, and circular economy projects aimed at recycling materials from old devices. In factories from Vietnam to Poland, Samsung introduced new clean manufacturing systems powered by solar and wind energy. They began designing phones and TVs with recyclable aluminum, eco-friendly plastics, and energy-efficient components. The Green Galaxy initiative reflected the company's resolve to merge innovation with responsibility. Meanwhile, Samsung's research division was quietly working on AI and quantum computing. Its labs in Suwon, Seoul, and California were developing next-gen neural processors that could think, adapt, and learn, creating devices that anticipate human needs before they're spoken. Imagine a phone that predicts your mood from your tone, or a refrigerator that adjusts its temperature based on your diet patterns. This was no longer science fiction, it was Samsung's roadmap. Then came the rise of foldables. After years of refining the Galaxy Fold concept, Samsung launched the Z Fold and Z Flip series not just as phones, but as lifestyle statements. The devices embodied everything Samsung stood for: risk-taking, boundary-pushing, and design brilliance. Where other companies played it safe, Samsung redefined what a smartphone could be. But even as the company dazzled the world with its tech, it never forgot its roots. The story of Lee Byung-chul, the founder, who started with a small trading company in 1938, remained engraved in its corporate soul. In Samsung's headquarters, a framed photo of Lee still hangs, reminding every employee that great empires start small. In 2021, during a global semiconductor shortage that crippled industries, Samsung's importance to the world economy became undeniable. From cars to gaming consoles, everything depended on chips, and Samsung was one of the few companies capable of producing them at scale. Governments around the world reached out for partnerships. Samsung responded by announcing a $17 billion chip plant in Texas, expanding its influence deep into the American tech sector. As competitors like Apple, Huawei, and Xiaomi fought for dominance in smartphones, Samsung quietly diversified even further. It entered biotechnology, autonomous driving systems, metaverse infrastructure, and even space communications. Every division was guided by one principle: to stay one step ahead of the world's imagination. But success didn't come without struggle. Global inflation, trade wars, and political tensions tested Samsung's stability. Yet, through every geopolitical storm, the company's secret weapon remained its resilience and adaptability. With a decentralized management structure and a relentless focus on R&D, Samsung weathered each crisis like a fortress built on innovation. The younger generation of leaders, including Lee Jae-yong, embraced a new corporate spirit: innovation with humanity. The goal wasn't just to make smarter gadgets, but to improve lives. Under his leadership, Samsung pledged billions toward education programs, startup incubators, and social development initiatives. From funding AI training centers in Africa to supporting young Korean entrepreneurs, Samsung began giving back to the global community that had fueled its rise. By 2023, Samsung had become the world's most diversified tech empire, operating across more than 200 subsidiaries and employing over 300,000 people worldwide. It wasn't just a company anymore. It was an entire economic ecosystem, influencing industries from chipmaking to digital art. Samsung's dominance extended beyond numbers. It became part of culture. From Hollywood blockbusters using Samsung displays, to Olympic Games sponsored by Galaxy phones, to futuristic homes running entirely on Samsung technology, the brand had evolved into a lifestyle enabler. The story of Samsung's rise is not just about business, it's about belief. The belief that a company born from post-war poverty could challenge the giants of the West. The belief that failure, whether it was the Note 7 crisis or a political scandal, could be transformed into fuel for future success. The belief that innovation never sleeps. Today, when you hold a Samsung device, you're not just holding technology, you're holding the spirit of reinvention. Each screen, chip, and product carries decades of struggle, adaptation, and courage. From selling dried fish in Daegu to designing foldable phones that shape the modern world, Samsung's story embodies the journey of an underdog that became unstoppable. It is a reminder that greatness is built not in comfort, but in challenge. And as the world steps into an era of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and smart everything, one thing remains certain: Samsung will be there, creating, redefining, and inspiring. Because for Samsung, the mission never ends. It's not just about the next device, it's about the next generation of human progress.